All right, so I'll get started a little bit. I'm sure more people will be trickling in as we go. I just wanted to say hi, my name is Paige Gross. I am the lead reporter at Technically Philly. And if, as we're chatting over the next 45 minutes, feel free to drop questions in the chat box to your right, and I will hopefully see them and be able to ask Talia and Erin about them. So ladies, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Erin, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Erin Randolph-Williams. I'm a lawyer in the Executive Compensation and Employee Benefits Group in the Philadelphia office of Morgan, Lewis & Bockius. I work with a wide range of companies from Fortune 100 to startup clients, and in particular help on the compensation aspects for those clients, cash and equity. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Talia Edmundson, and I am the founder and principal of HR&B Consulting, which is a small, medium-size, and startup-specific HR consulting practice focused on developing the employee experience, kind of from start to finish, which does include compensation design and hiring practices that are compensation in focus.
Yeah. Thank you. So for those of you who are just joining, today we are going to be talking about what founders and professionals need to know about compensation. Especially this year, things are really crazy. So we're going to kind of be diving into the fact that, yes, this 2020 has been brutal in many ways for businesses, the leaders of those businesses and the employees. So we're kind of going to be looking at what entrepreneurs and employees need to be thinking about when they come to compensation or when they bring up that conversation, and also the trends and adaptations that we have seen over the last, 6 months or so. And joining us, if you've just joined, is Talia Edmundson and Erin Randolph-Williams. So 2020, what a year. We know that compensation has changed quite a bit because of the unprecedented times that we're in. But what have you seen over the last 6 to 8 months in how compensation has been changing this year?
So I think for a lot of businesses, especially, when COVID first happened, the immediate response was, pay cuts to stay alive, looking at payroll from top to bottom, headcounts or total compensation, and trying to make adjustments. And, I think part of that was necessary, but I also am curious, how much of that was a little bit knee-jerk. There have been a lot of companies that have very strategically pivoted, not only to survive, but are now thriving in a COVID environment. Product mix changed, customer approach changed, a lot of things that companies have been very successful in doing. And, trying to make sure now that there's a compensation almost restoration plan to make up for the pay cuts that I think were kind of knee-jerk. And I know that that's a focus, especially now, getting everyone back to 100%, and especially trying to navigate what comp was going to look like and become in light of, PPP loans, paying those back. That's more of Erin's kind of specialty there, but that is something very much to consider when you factor in what your comp restoration plan is going to be if you were a company that decided to reduce comp to make sure you could stay open.
And of course, there are legal aspects to that compensation restoration plan, not just sort of from an HR messaging perspective, but a tax perspective. So, we've told our clients to try not to make promises, really, that they're going to pay back those reductions, because there are some sort of tax pitfalls as to how and when you can pay those deficiencies back, if that were at all part of your plan. So,
got it. Yeah. Transparency is definitely a big issue, especially as we're going through a lot of just changes that you wouldn't expect in a normal year. So what does compensation transparency really mean, and what does it look like right now?
compensation is very important to your employees. It's really, and it's an emotional thing for a lot of people. That's how they plan their lives.
Right.
We all know that we tend to spend what we get paid. So a drastic cut without much notice can be devastating to employees, even a minimal cut, because our lifestyles grow to our compensation. So if you're going to make a change, giving employees as much notice as possible. I mean, there are some state laws that require you to give certain amount of notice if you're going to do reductions. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, just giving as much notice as possible, explaining the why, and then trying to keep people on board and keep people excited with the messaging on the company strategy, I think is really critical when you're communicating that. And we've seen, there was the Me Too movement a couple years ago, the racial justice movement now. Our firm has been involved in a number of investigations, internal investigations with whistleblowers in that aspect. And one of I would say probably the number one issue that people say is, I know somebody who has the exact same title as me with less experience making more money.
Right.
Oh, and it's a white man, So those things, once you're in that situation where your company's in the press and you have to bring in a team of lawyers to help investigate, that gets very expensive and very time consuming. So being transparent at the outset, I think will save you a lot of time and money.
I think transparency, to Erin's point, salary is very personal. I think if you put it in this, I hate to do the Maslow's hierarchy, but sometimes there's room for it. It's directly tied to security in every aspect of life. And I think if you're going to have a salary transparent organization, designing that is difficult. It's a big lift. So for any company that's thinking, oh, I want to have salary transparency, please know that it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of research. I think making sure that you understand how to price a job using legitimate compensation software that factors in everything from your location of your business, to your revenue size, to the industry that you're in, to how many employees that you have, and then how many people are in that role. Comp is very complex. So if you just go on to salary.com and you say that I am the, HR director in Philly, you're probably going to get something that's overstated if you went into it without that element of detail. So when you're trying to be a compensation transparent organization, make sure you're doing a lot of research in the background. And then once that research is complete, you literally need to benchmark yourself across everything that you've discovered. You have to be financially ready to make up for the difference. Otherwise, you did all of that work and you published it, and all you did was tell your people that they're underpaid. Right. So you have to be ready to actually make up for the difference. And then from there, if you're going to make that information public to everyone, you have to be very ready to have conversations around if you have a, say, salary range for a developer and everyone's at this, developer same level, but there's a range. How does one progress within that range without necessarily getting promoted or leveling up? I think, there's a way to move within compensation that doesn't necessarily get tied to promotions and things. Like I said, there's, lateral movement that's involved as well. So salary transparency does need to be, it's intentional, but it does need to be extremely planned for. It's has to carry throughout the organization.
Yeah. There's long been a stigma, and I'm sure it's associated with kind of the gender pay gap that exists, that we don't talk about salary. I know you said it's a very personal thing, but is that still relevant? Do you think that, I think there's a lot of structural things in play to make sure that employees are not talking to each other about their salaries for whatever reason. Is that still relevant? Do you feel that it's appropriate for employees to ask each other what they're making, and then kind of what they do with that information is, comes after that? But salary transparency could simply be saying to your fellow, employee that has the same role as you, what are you making? Is that still off the table?
I think it's foolish for companies to think that their employees are not talking about compensation. I think you need to assume that everyone is discussing it. And in fact, you can't, Erin can speak to this as well. It's protected language. So the NLRB, despite being, even if you're a non-union employer, you can't forbid that language. So I think, understanding that, or at least assuming that your employees are talking about it, does put some ownership on your management team. This lives well outside of HR. It's not just an HR specific conversation to be able to have a discussion around comp, who's earning what and why. And then also helping the person who might have an issue with their coworker who is out earning them understand the differences, especially if they are in the same role. It is relatively acceptable within a specific framework that two people with the same job title are not making the same amount of money.
Right.
And I think some of the differences too can fall in the sort of variable comp range, the incentive range. So being very clear about what the sort of targets are for earning more on the incentive side, I think is very helpful because people clearly understand what they need to do. And that's going to vary by an individual's position in the organization, how close they are to being able to influence the business. But, that's another element of comp that needs to be transparent as well. And, to Talia's point, yes, people talk. So oftentimes the client will say, well, I'm going to give this person X. Well, just understand you're creating a precedent. Well, they're not allowed to tell them. We have a confidentiality agreement. And I just know you're creating a precedent. It's not going to stay quiet. Mm-hmm. So I agree. People talk.
Yeah. Talia, as someone who is really advising people who are maybe creating their first company and they're dealing with questions like, how do I decide, number one, when I should create this role? And number two, what it should be paid? How often are you the first person that founder is talking to about, okay, well, I need to hire for this role. It is totally different from my expertise. How do I figure out what that person should be paid?
Yeah, I get that question pretty often. And like I said before, there's very reliable compensation software that is respected, regarded, and used well within the HR community. There are a few different platforms. It just really depends on the user interface that you want, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
But the output is the same. And as long as that data is consistent and reputable, then you're off to a good start. So having all of the, like I said before, relevant pieces, the industry you're in, the location, the revenue size of your company, I think especially with startups, small businesses, even medium-sized businesses, if you have an employee whose friend went to work at a giant company that has excessive revenue, and they're going to probably make 10 to 20% more than you are, it's tough for small and medium-sized businesses, especially startups, even to keep up with that. It's not a fair comparison. So when we have these conversations and, founders want to know, what is the job, or what is the market rate for a role? Once we determine that number, the one thing that I emphasize all the time is the job pays what it pays. And by that, I mean, when you're implementing a hiring practice, Philly did the right thing, in my opinion, it was like probably 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, they introduced you're not allowed to ask for salary history. I loved it.
That just got passed. I think that just passed September 1st. So yeah, it was introduced like 2 years ago, but it's relevant as of now.
And a lot of companies did the right thing. They were even doing the right thing before that. And then rather than waiting around for it to be signed into law, they were already removing that from the hiring process. Because if you sit down and you figure out what you can afford for a job based on the market and what the company can pay, you're already acknowledging that you can afford to pay that as a salary. It can never matter what someone's currently making. That's not part of the equation. And that's where I think that gap gets widened across genders, across ethnicities. When you're talking to a person, you're interviewing them for the role that they're going to do for your company, and the salary pays $60,000 a year. Are you okay with that salary? I would like to move you forward into the hiring process. You did not ask them what they were making. You didn't even ask them what their expectations were. You told them what the job pays, and then you let that candidate make the decision. So when you're hiring, there are very honest and transparent ways to get money out at the very beginning and have a very honest dialogue about what the job pays. And it's realistic to the market because you did your homework and you priced the job before you posted it.
Yeah. Is that your advice, Talia? Is that you tell people to express that early on? That's something I've heard from sources before, is that, you know, they've gone through 3 interviews and gotten a job offer only to learn that they're $10,000 less than their acceptable salary. So they wasted all of that time essentially.
And how frustrating is that, especially now? And I know that companies it's very tempting to, you know, if you are hurting financially, to potentially underpay a candidate because that's all you can afford, when in reality, you're doing them such a disservice because there are other companies out there hiring for the same job that are paying the right rate for that role, despite what's happening with COVID. Right. So to answer your question, yes, that is always my guidance. Pandemic or not, the job pays what it pays. And in that, when I speak with people, because I do often help with hiring for the companies that I work with, during a phone interview, if I like the candidate that I'm speaking with and I want to move them forward into the next step of the process, I tell them what the salary is for the job. And I ask them, armed with that knowledge and your experience with me, would you like to move forward in the process? And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's at the phone screen. So, and I'm not, you know, I'm the consultant in the mix. Right. I'm not even the employee. So to think that you went to the 3rd interview and you got to the offer stage, how exciting, especially now you get that offer. And it's so defeating, you know, that you went through all of that and it's not going to meet your needs.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are job hunting right now. Either they were furloughed, they had to leave because the culture got really toxic. You know, there's been a lot of changes in 2020. Is there a way, and this could be from the legal perspective or just kind of the practice perspective, is there a way to ask, let's say you have no idea what this job is intending to pay. Is there a way to ask early enough along that you feel comfortable like committing the time because you feel comfortable with that range? How do you ask that as a person interviewing?
I mean, I'm happy to answer, Erin. I don't want to take all the time. Go ahead. Have a recommendation. Yeah. So from the candidate side, I think that is a conversation that people need to get used to. I think, you know, when you prep for an interview, you know, there's a set of questions I think that people are always ready to answer, like what I like to do in my spare time, or what are your greatest strengths, and like all that nonsense. I think you need to be equally prepared. I shouldn't have called it nonsense. Those are legitimate questions, but I think you need to be equally prepared and rehearse that conversation and putting it in framework that every individual candidate is comfortable with. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being scripted. You never want to go into an interview forgetting to ask questions, or you want to practice that question as much as you practice your responses to what you know is coming.
Right.
And when you are a candidate and not only do you know your own worth, but you know what the job is supposed to pay, if compensation does not come up initially, I see nothing wrong with bringing that up to the point of saying, based on my experience, based on what I know that this job pays in this market, my expectation is this. Can you please help me manage that expectation? Or can you help me understand what the salary range is for this position? I think the only time that gets a little bit tricky is when the person who's doing that kind of initial interview, unfortunately, sometimes is not equipped with that response. Yeah. And that's a company issue. That's not a candidate issue. But I think normalizing the conversation around comp has been happening for long enough now, where the person that's having that initial conversation does have that information. So my point is, ready yourself as a candidate, get comfortable with how you want to ask the question, practice on people. There are a lot of search firms in the city. There's one in particular that's just been giving free advice on, career coaching and readiness since the pandemic hit. These resources are available, and people are giving away so much fantastic information for absolutely nothing, no charge, no strings, because they really want to help everyone get back into the workforce. So take advantage of practice.
Yeah. Erin, if you don't have anything to add to that, I have a question that I think would probably be best garnered toward you. Going back to kind of pay equity a little bit, if you are in a company and you're managing people and someone comes to you and says, I know that, X, X, and X, these people are making more than me. How do you approach that from a legal perspective?
Well, I think you need to take it seriously. I think one of the worst things you can do is to ignore that kind of comment, ignore that question, and sweep it under the rug, because people don't forget, right? And then you'll get a reputation of not taking that kind of thing seriously. And then I think you need to do an investigation. Why are people making different amounts? Oftentimes, especially when a company grows very quickly, those decisions are made on an ad hoc basis, and the individuals are allowed to negotiate, differently. Maybe they're being hired by different managers, and there's just no continuity. So if that comes up, I think it's really time for a company to stop and take an inventory, and then try to come up with some sort of systematic compensation model. I mean, we would like for you to do that at the outset. I understand, because this happens on the legal side all the time. You're growing so quickly and you're trying to get your product out that all of that other stuff seems like just a hassle that you don't want to spend time on. And you'll spend time on that when you have money or when you have time or when you're successful. Well, oftentimes it's too late, and then you'll end up putting a lot more money into trying to fix it. So I think if you haven't done the work at the outset, as Talia recommended, then I think if your approach, take it seriously and try to figure out how to fix it.
Got it. Yeah. I think like something that you said, Talia, was really saying maybe when you're hired or early on in that process, just like, here are the benchmarks that we need to see, or that we just kind of follow organizationally to kind of get you to that next point. I'm sure that startups are not often thinking about when there'll be 100 people. They're probably just thinking, how are we going to get past 5 people? How, like you said, Erin, how are we going to push this product out? So we've kind of gone over, it's okay to start having those conversations early. Just accept the fact that your employees are going to talk to each other. So really this has become a lot more of a public or more comfortable conversation in the last few years. But I would say COVID really threw a lot of things out of the door. I've heard friends who have gotten a pay cut, friends who have been furloughed, friends who have been, offered a job after being furloughed for 6 months, but it's like $10,000 less than what they were making. So we're just at a really challenging time right now, especially with pay equity and just with pay in general. So do you have advice for someone who maybe is switching jobs right now, or is having to find a new job because of coronavirus? What are the pay expectations right now? Are they business as usual because we're 6 months in, or do you still expect companies to be, maybe you'll get hired, but we're in the middle of a pay freeze, so this just is what it is?
Yeah, I made a comment earlier about companies taking advantage of COVID and intent. Clearly, that is not a place that you would want to work. And I think during the interview process, companies that are intentionally underpaying will reveal themselves in a variety of ways. So I think during the interview, just through asking the right questions, you'll get a great feel for how they are as a work environment, even pre-COVID. But for the companies that can truly only afford a specific salary for a job, I think there are a lot of things that come along with total compensation that are oftentimes overlooked. I think right now, while we're all working in a very distributed manner, you have a salary that you need, but a lot of people, quite frankly, are not fully equipped to work out of their home, out of their attic, out of their laundry room, wherever in the world this is taking place. So I think asking questions around equipment, ensuring you're able to work successfully, what PTO looks like, especially now that everyone's distributed, and what their healthcare plans look like. I think even before, the last 3.5 years, healthcare has always been, I think, an often overlooked part of a total compensation package. And when you're taking a deeper look at what your co-pays are, what your out-of-pocket expenses are, base salary is one piece of total compensation. Mm-hmm. So while right now, financially, it might be difficult for companies to pay, 100% of the salary that they would have pre-COVID, there are a lot of things that have not been intentionally gone after because salary is the easy button, but reducing benefits in the middle of a plan year, that's not legal. And then trying to figure out what companies have done to make sure that their employees are working in a distributed manner comfortably. A few companies have said, we don't care where you work ever again. We're never going to have an office. Well, what an extraordinary opportunity if you are a person who can get up and go work from California if you felt like it, or Costa Rica when they finally let us back in again, or wherever in the world you want to be. That's a significant benefit. So I think right now, focusing on all of the elements of what total compensation is versus base salary, I think helps job seekers have a better picture of what's going to be offered to them.
And can you negotiate parts of that total compensation packet like you could your salary? Like, for instance, if you counter and they say we can't go up anymore, could you say, great, well, I want 3 extra days of PTO? Like, is that something companies might be willing to give right now instead of that extra money that they may not have on hand?
Absolutely, especially if you're the person that they want working for you. And the thing that you have to your advantage right now is if you make it to the offer stage, think about all of the people that are in the job market and you're the one that got that offer. And I think use a little leverage there. Yeah. Get your swagger. You got an offer letter in one of the worst economies that a lot of people living right now have never, ever been in, right? So since 2008, it's been a long time. So I would say use that for your confidence in all of the job seekers and all of the people that this company spoke with. You're the one that got that offer letter. They want you to work for them. So ask a few questions. No one ever got, their offer rescinded because they asked for PTO.
Right.
That's,
Yeah.
And I like that you brought up the total compensation idea, Talia, because it's really important to understand what your workforce values. Mm-hmm. Now, even pre-COVID, a lot of, younger generations valued the flexibility of working from home. Well, that's kind of typically an easy give. When my son was younger, the firm had subsidized childcare. Mm-hmm. That was huge for me. And the firm, I'm sure, paid far less for that benefit than it felt like for me. And they didn't have to give me extra money, but the benefit made me feel good. It made me feel like, I'm in a place that really cares about it. Now, obviously they want to do that because they want you coming to work. So they want to take care of your child. So I get that. But for different people, different things mean a lot more than just dollars. Mm-hmm. So really trying to understand your workforce and to seeing what you can do for individuals that's not going to cost you more. But again, as I said before, you're going to set a precedent. So if you're going to give it to somebody, be forewarned that somebody else might ask for it. Right. So it's not just a one-off in most cases.
Yeah. I think Erin said something really important there that I want to emphasize is that this total compensation package that you're being offered is a complete reflection of what the company values. So while one person may not be the one that takes advantage of that subsidized daycare, it does make you think about how they regard family or some sort of work-life blend, or how they're just trying to make things easier financially for employees who do need childcare.
Right.
So you might not be the one that needs that benefit, but the fact that it's made available to everyone is definitely something that I think, you have to look at those small things, and it's an element of respect for sure.
Yeah. And I know internally at Technically, we just did an audit of who is contributing to the 401k and then just decided to revamp that program a little bit so that Technically is matching at a higher rate than it was before. And are there things like that or maybe it's if you're at a startup, giving those people equity, those first couple of hires equity. Can you talk about that a little bit as kind of, I know that that's not necessarily compensation, but it plays into the overall money situation of the company and of the employees.
So I would say equity is compensation for sure. For a lot of reasons. One is if you come in early, you're going to really benefit from the upside if you're there for the long haul. And the other reason that I think it's compensation is startup employees expect that. I mean, that's really what people use, especially startups who are cash poor. They use equity to kind of build that bridge to get a total compensation package that's going to be attractive. I also think of it as compensation because there are real tax effects of getting this equity. And so you have to pay taxes on that, just like you would on getting cash, depending on the form of equity. So, a lot of things you have to take into account are, are these people, are they at the level? Are they influencing the business? Are they contributing to the upside so that they deserve that equity? The amounts that you're giving out, and then sort of the vesting. Are you encouraging people to stay? Just, service-based vesting? Do you want to add in performance-based hurdles? So are you encouraging people to complete certain projects, have certain, hit certain revenue targets? So I think equity can give you a lot of flexibility, and depending on, what your employees expect on that side, and then kind of how much they're contributing to the upside. I mean, I think that can go a really long way for companies and attracting employees.
Yeah. Juliana, one of our attendees, just had a great follow-up question to the negotiating other parts of the compensation. She said, when you start negotiating benefits with individual employees, how does that play into the overall salary transparency or transparency around compensation?
So I would say aside from the PTO, on the benefits side, representing companies most of the time, I would say, no, you've got a benefit package, right? Like you're not going to set up a separate matching contribution under the 401k plan for one person, not another person. I mean, there's also legal issues with that, but you're not going to give one person a better health plan than another person. You're going to have a suite of, health plans that people can choose from, and everyone has the same choice. So it kind of depends on the benefits. PTO aside, I would not recommend really, unless you have a CEO who, for example, wants a special disability policy or something like that. I would not recommend prescribing different benefits for individuals on that basis.
Yeah, traditional benefits are rarely up for negotiation, as Erin said. In fact, sometimes it's illegal. Not sometimes, most of the time, it's illegal to make adjustments to your traditional benefits just to cater to one employee. I mentioned traditional benefits when we talk about total compensation, just because, if you're faced with two offers and you're looking at one healthcare plan that has no co-pays for primary care visits, your co-pays for a specialist are only $20, your premiums out of your paycheck are low, and then you're faced with another offer that also has low paycheck premiums, but your specialist co-pays are $80.
Right.
Your primary care doc is $40. You think about your personal needs, and that really helps make your decision. Yeah. But non-traditional benefits like PTO, in an environment where people are still working in the office, how many, maybe they had a set amount of work at home days pre-COVID, and they're looking at what that looks like post-COVID. Those days can be negotiated. Typically, that happens in non-traditional benefits.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got it.
I hope I answered Juliana's question.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left. If anyone else wants to drop a question in the chat, feel free. So I think 2020 has been a big year of reckonings in a lot of senses. But I think that pay equity has come up a lot. Just people kind of realizing that maybe it's been an issue for a long time, but they're kind of seeing the reality of it play out in front of them. What are the trends, I guess, in pay equity, breaking it down by gender and race and maybe experience? what are you seeing lately? Are you seeing kind of a push for companies to kind of get their shit together and pay employees equally? And what does that look like from the outside? I guess outside pressure, kind of how is that affecting actual human resources and compensation?
I think now everyone that, oh, go ahead, Erin.
No, go ahead.
I heard someone say this the other day, and it like kind of made me laugh in that like Y2K was the year of the IT professional, and then 2008 was the year of the accounting professional, just because of what was happening, with the economy, and that 2020 is the year of the HR professional, just because of all of the things that have happened in the world.
Yeah.
And all the folks I'm talking to, all the HR people are kind of like, I am involved in more conversations now than I ever have been before. I can't believe that it took a global health crisis for my CEO to pay attention to me. Right. And now that I have their attention, what should I do? What are the hills that I'm willing to die on? Right. What is it that's worth my time? And I want to take advantage of, being involved more now than ever. And the best HR people are also staying super humble. And with everything that's happening in the world, I'm encouraging them to raise their hands and say, you know what, this isn't really something I'm great at, but I think we need to take a look at how we're paying everyone. I want to bring in a third party. And I think people are afraid to say that because you're almost saying that it's not, something that you're good at. But at the same time, this is not where you want to play around. And having a third party come in, there are a lot of companies that do this. It is not as expensive as you would imagine. And having an external resource come in and do a full comp audit, their job is to come in and look at, compensation from a completely gender agnostic perspective, complete ethnicity agnostic perspective. The job pays what it pays and show you where your gaps are. And then they're also trying to help you come up with a plan to make it right. Right now is hard if you're cash strapped, for sure. But you've had a third party come in and impartially tell you where you have issues with how you're paying people. And to Erin's point before, when you're a startup, if you didn't get it right in the beginning, which a lot of times startups don't, and that's not a dig at startups at all. You're just kind of limited in what you can do, and you're just trying to hire people as fast as possible. But at some point, you have to hit the reset button if you are going to pay everyone equitably. And I think that it's, the great HR people right now are saying, we need to pay attention to this. And I'm not the one, and neither are you. So why don't we get someone in that can help us with this path to, filling the gaps that we've unintentionally created and getting us in a position to pay equitably.
Yeah, I totally agree. We do have a lot of clients who are getting pay equity studies from outside third parties. And one thing I want to say, which may have been obvious, but, Talia and I talked about how people talk. So one of the most damaging things is they don't just talk amongst each other, but there's social media. So social media can be very, very damaging to your business. And it can make it extremely hard for you to recruit people if you're not getting some of these things right. And it goes to pay equity. It also goes to company culture. So exemplifying your company values in your benefit offerings, I think can go a really long way. But, people should understand too that it's not just talk, right? And it's not just offering benefits. It's, it has to really flow through to through the whole organization. And so I just want people to really understand that they don't have to worry about two people sitting next to each other or best friends in the office talking. They really need to worry about all of this information getting out to the entire world very quickly.
Yeah. I think also because, especially when we talk about pay equity between genders, it does boil down to, being a 20-something female professional, it breaks down to, is this a good place to work as a woman? Like, those are conversations I have had with friends as an intern. That's stuff that you pay attention to. And it definitely, throughout your life, I think that is something that you consider. So like what you said, Erin, about what your benefits show that you care about, but also what is the company culture. Because I think, honestly, tech, especially when we talk about tech has been known to have high salaries, especially high growth, high turnover, high opportunity. But it really boils down to sometimes that culture and your managers that really either keep somebody or makes them want to leave. So yeah, yes, a couple mentions to the notorious RBG who just left us, but thanks to her, we're able to have these conversations about pay equity and, you know, existing as women in the workforce. Yes. I'm just reading a slew of cute messages coming through, so I appreciate it.
I also think I saw Juliana had a follow-up question too, and I think that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. I completely forgot about that. I've seen candidates negotiate a payout or kind of like a benefit waiver amount if they don't need the health care. I've seen it done for sure. I do side note for that though, for the people that I've seen negotiate that successfully, it's been a one-time payment because the company offers you that opt-out little bonus. They don't want to be responsible for tracking that on an annual basis, and they don't want to assume that you're never going to take benefits. So I wouldn't suggest factoring that into long-term total compensation, but I do think that that's a great point to negotiate for sure. Thank you for bringing that up.
I've also heard of like a signing bonus. Maybe they can't commit to giving you $5,000 extra every year, but if you sign now, we'll give you 10 grand. We'll not talk about salary for a little while, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Especially if you're leaving an employer where, say, you were on some sort of tuition reimbursement program and you have to pay them back because you didn't stay long enough to, you know, for them to recoup that benefit. You could possibly negotiate the sign-on to cover what you would owe your current employer if you're not in transition.
Got it.
And oftentimes we help employers put in, you know, clawback policies on that sign-on too, because if you're giving folks kind of a big slug of money to walk in the door, you certainly want them to stay. Yeah. So, you know, if they stay for a year, then they have to, and they quit after 1 year, they pay back 50%. If they quit after 2 years, then it's, you know, there's free and clear. So there are ways to ensure that you're not just throwing money at people.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess final points, a lot of the practical advice that we can use comes to what are the phrases or keywords that we can actually use in a salary negotiation, or what have you seen done really successfully that gets people to where they would be satisfied with, whether it be the actual salary or the compensation package as a whole?
I think, well, I'll let Talia speak more generally, at least on the executive side. It really comes down to understanding what is valuable to that person. Not everyone values a higher base salary. Most people do, but they also value other benefits or retirement benefits or something like that. So depending on where people are in their lives, you know, how old they are, how much experience they have, what's really important to them. So just really listening to people and understanding what's important and not thinking that you just create some sort of compensation package in a vacuum and then throw it out there and hope it sticks. But, you know, trying to understand your company strategy and what people value generally, I think would be helpful.
I'll answer the question assuming that this is like when the employee, or I'm sorry, when the candidate receives an offer. Is that?
Yeah.
Obviously, my dog is like super pumped about compensation as well. So, when you receive an offer, I'm a huge fan in general of phrasing like, help me understand whatever, like insert finishing line there. Thank you so much for this offer. You've given me a lot to think about. Can you help me understand how the company arrived at this number? And I always think it's like how the company, not how you, because the recruiter did not come up with that number. Like, but they did not. They were probably involved in a conversation around what they're seeing in the market and what other, you know, that position's being offered in other places. But you was very targeted. You was very specific. And the reality is the person that sent you that email, they're probably going to go to bat if you are trying to negotiate. So maybe, you know, be mindful of how that's coming across, especially if it's in writing, right? So a little bit softer.
Got it.
Super pumped. Thank you for taking me through the stage. Really excited to have the offer. You've given me a lot to think about. Can you help me understand how the company arrived at this number? And then they have the answer.
Yeah.
You didn't put anything else in there. You asked the question, and then they're probably going to go, oh shit, we need to figure this out. Or they're already going to have a response, because the companies that are doing this right and have been, I do want to point out that there are companies who have been working diligently to make sure that their comp strategy is equitable for a long time. Mm-hmm. They are going to be prepared to answer that question. So I think it's fair game to ask it. Now, the response you get, that could be interesting. But I think anything around the lines of, help me understand. And it's never you, because the recruiter didn't make that decision. Someone else did.
Awesome. Probably pertinent to a lot of people who are job hunting right now. So very appreciated. Thank you so much, Talia and Erin. Is there any last minute remarks you wanted to add? If not, I think we're a little over time, actually.
No, we're good. I'm good. This is great.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you, Paige. Bye.